Hello, 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 everyone. Can everybody hear me
Hi.
okay? Hi,
Yes, hi,
Janice.
Susie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our second webinar in our three-part series. Tonight's webinar is going to be on routines. The title of our webinar today is Clear, Positive, and Predictable: The Power of Routine in Child Development. We want to thank Janice and the team over at Academia Montessori for giving us the opportunity to share this information with you guys, and we hope that you guys will find it super, super helpful. With me, I have my team. I have Jessica Orozco Barajas, who, if you were at our last webinar, you were lucky enough to take in all of the awesome and very helpful information that she provided to us on developmental milestones. Also with us, we have Veri Chavarin, who is in charge of our education program. And so they will be taking the lead on this, and I will be chiming in and putting in my 2 cents here and there. So I really hope that you guys get a lot out of this. Routines are super, super important. I cannot tell you how much they help me at home. And I hope this is really helpful for you guys.
Are we gonna wait for a few more people, Susie, or when do you want to get
I am
started?
letting I am letting everyone in right now. It looks like we're good to go. So I think we can go ahead and start now. You guys are able to see my screen, yes?
Mhm. Yes, yes, yes. Okay.
Here we go.
Okay. So welcome everybody. We're going to be talking about routines and schedules and why they're so important. And hopefully by the end of today, you'll feel like invested and you found motivation, right, in establishing different routines, because as much pushback as you'll probably get in initiating stuff, at the end of the day, it really does make parents' life easier. And so with that, we're going to go through what routines matter, right? The benefits of routines for you as parents, just different areas that are, ideas, especially for little ones, right? Where we can kind of start to build daily routines, right? Building positive routines. So yes, even though we're going to be providing some structure to kids' routines, which they don't necessarily always think that they want, but really it makes them feel safe. It's nice to also do it in a fun way, right? And they tend to be more receptive when we do things in a fun way, right? And troubleshooting, just common stuff, right? Things that you might have hiccups on. Every kid has their temperament, and so like I said, on one end you might have kids that kind of like nonchalant, they're like, okay, whatever, right? We can do routines, and other kids that will really protest. But still, if we can entertain them a little bit and like involve them in the process, right? Why all that's kind of like beneficial. And then this PowerPoint or this presentation won't be as like information dense as the last one was. And so we can definitely, we'll have some more time to answer questions. We want some of your feedback. And so hopefully, right, it'll be a nice balance between the two. And so with that, we'll kind of get into our content. Okay, so learning outcomes, right? Why routines matter, especially for kids 0 to 5, because again, right, we're going to set the foundation and the tone for life moving forward. Learn how routines really do support, right, like this social, emotional, like cognitive function in kids, especially kids that maybe emotionally dysregulate pretty easily. Like I think it's especially beneficial for those kids. And then just like go over like practical tips, right? Like how to have fun making charts and routine schedules, if that's your cup of tea, right? Like how to use different like reward charts and positive reinforcements, right? To create that motivation so that kids can actually want to cooperate with the different routines that we have in place. And so if anybody, Susie, I don't know if are we requesting that everybody's camera is like off? I don't know, in case people have like to raise their
Everyone's
hands.
off, I think. It really does not make a difference to me. I would love to see people's faces. Everyone has their camera
Oh, no,
off.
I didn't know if it was like something that we had like put in place.
Hey,
So,
there's Sergio.
hello. Yeah, no, so one of the things that I was gonna ask is like, does anybody have a routine that they're starting off with, or that maybe you've been trying to implement, but maybe have run into some hiccups? And if so, if you want to share so that I can keep writing note of that, like as we move along through the presentation.
If you feel more
And it's not,
comfortable, you can also type it in the chat as well, and we'll be more than happy to read it out. And also, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can also type those questions in the chat as well, if that's more comfortable for you guys.
yes, so nobody feels like they're put on the spot, for sure. So routines versus schedules, and there's a lot of kind of debate over, right, what is what. Some people sometimes hear it, right, as like, oh, schedules are like when you actually have times like put into a routine, right? And routines are kind of like just like the steps or the order in which things happen. But if you think about it, like schedules are kind of more like the big picture things, right? And then the routines will kind of come in and again, like I just said, like implement like where those things are going to fall, right? Sometimes you want to be mindful of resources, including your own energy levels, right? When it comes to how you're going to organize your day, that is actually something that we really want to keep in mind. And then we want to have both of these, right? And so depending on how you want to look at it, if you want to say like, okay, so schedule, big picture, I have these many hours in the day. This is more or less what I want to allot my time to. And then like, okay, this is the order in which we're going to kind of put these different things. Whether it has times or not, that's entirely up to you. But it is important to kind of keep things simple, at least, right? Very like at the very beginning. So I really like these charts. If you have like can I brush my teeth? Or the different order of the day. And there's different ways that you can do these and make them fun. A lot of times, and this is, I was playing with something earlier. I don't even know if I have it anymore, but I just wanted to show you. So I'm really big on, what is it? I don't know that I'll find it. I won't find it because I'm looking for it. But I'm really big on kind of laminating things. And so I'll cut all this stuff out and then I Velcro stuff to the back, and, kind of come up with my own. And I'll take whatever I have in the house, other than my little Velcro sticky things, and my little chippy laminator that I use, because a lot of times we're like, oh, I can't afford that. I think I got my laminator like years ago for like $15 or something like that. And literally just cut them out and have kids, right, kind of put things on. You can draw a line if you want, and then like have them move things over when they complete things. And that's a very interactive way of doing it. If you want to teach them something, that is also something that you can put as part of your routine, right? So like reading and all of that fun stuff, like I did a lot of that, building in like a reading time for my kids, like at bedtime. And so that was a time they didn't know they'd be practicing, right? Like they're reading. So there's a lot of different benefits to adding these routines and schedules. The biggest thing, right, is that it provides kids with a sense of predictability, right? And that often leads to a sense of safety, less anxiety throughout their day, right? Like if I know what to expect, then I can navigate things much easier. I can protest, right? But I know what's coming my way. And so when kids are really, really young, you want them to feel safe, right? Like in their environment, wherever they're at. And so aside from all the added benefits and bonuses that we're going to be talking about, right? I think this is one of those things where routines and schedules can be very individualized and you can add, right, learning opportunities and all of these different things, right, to make this, right, have more value, if you will. And so routines create a sense of safety and security for sure. Even if I don't like it, if I know that I'm expected to do something, right, like it becomes part of my everyday thing, and you'll see less and less protest that comes, right? Again, this allows kids to also develop different skills, if you will. where, right, they're teaching opportunities, but teaching them also that they can accomplish things, and like giving them the sense of, oh my, I have a loss for words. Yeah, like a sense of accomplishment, because I can't think of the word that I was thinking about right now. But this is how we encourage and we praise and we do those types of things. And when kids know like that they're able to accomplish tasks, right? Even if it's something like getting dressed on my own, or like I brush my teeth on my own. Those are things that they feel proud of, right? And it gives them the sense of like agency. And so when we're sending them off like to school and things, it's like, oh, I can do this, right? Like I'm autonomous in this way. And so that is a really big way to also build their self-esteem, right? So on top of like building this sense of safety and security and predictability, right? Like now on top of that, we add this sense of like competence, right? Like I'm building skills and I'm getting good at it. And so self-esteem wise, right? Like again, when we're talking about just secure attachments and kids that feel like, okay, I'm doing well, those are like some really big stepping stones and foundations that you're kind of like setting for them. Yeah. They also help children understand, right, what's expected of them. And so a lot of times when we teach this in like parenting classes, right, like 10-week, 12-week classes, this is like a precursor to like limit setting and rules. Because once kids know, right, like, okay, this is kind of what's expected, like in my routine, and I know that I have to do these things, then the next layer to that is it's a pretty big foundation to like what's expected of you at behavior wise, right? And so when we do things outside of this stuff, right now, there's a lot less of a learning curve because it's not all these different behaviors, right? Like for the most part, by getting children to kind of comply with this, we're teaching compliance. And so it's not so out of the norm that we're going to like give them a task or a command, if you will, or set some kind of expectation. So then when we say like, okay, this is not acceptable behavior, this is something that we're going to have to like set a rule around or a limit, right? They're already kind of used to the fact that there's certain expectations for my behavior. So now that you're placing a demand, it's not so extraordinary that I really am going to have this huge reaction to it. Does that make sense? Kind of, sort of, thumbs up. And again, we reduce stress, reduce anxiety. Again, we're talking about building independence, self-control, like a sense of autonomy, which is really key things for like self-esteem. And then we develop these like positive habits, right? So chores, for example, are a thing that a lot of parents kind of like struggle with. It's like, do I give my kids chores? At what time do I kind of introduce chores? And they can be part of a schedule that you like, everybody has to do this, right? So like everybody cooperates in setting the table. And of course, depending on their age, you're not going to have them carry like glass things, but right, we support them. And so when we do this, I learn that I'm part of a team, right? Like I'm learning all of these different things that I can then carry on. So doing a chore maybe might look different, right? When you go to college, when you go to school, right? But the idea of I help out, right? Like I'm an integral part of whatever team that I'm in and I play a role and it's an important one. So I'm not just like a bystander, right? That is important to teach kids really early on. And the earlier we start to teach them that they play an active, important role in the family, right? And we do that by including them in a lot of these things, right? So I know I'm guilty of it, and most parents that I've worked with are guilty of it, but like say, kids are really curious, like when you're like cooking potentially, right? Or when like laundry for whatever reason, like my kids always want to know where mommy disappears into, like when I have to go into the garage. And so I'm like, okay, really, you want to know, like you help me out, right? And so now weekends, they each kind of have their hamper, right? And they like walk with me and it's during, right, the morning time. And so we're building this, right? So at least I'm confident when my son goes away to college, if he decides to go away, he can do his laundry, right? So that's one thing that, and he feels really proud of that. He's 12, he just learned. And so like, those are the things, right? Where it's like, you matter, your help matters, you know, and I can't help but like reiterate that. And when we incorporate them, even in establishing routines, right? Like, okay, so what do you think we should do? Or like, is good enough, right? Or important enough to kind of, let's say we're going to make a list, right? To put in a list of things that we have to do in the morning. Kids do, depending on their personalities, but most of them are really like, oh, wow, like I'm being part of this. I'm being included, right? To be part of the process, which is huge for them. I don't know how often that a lot of the kids that I work with will say things like, oh, like kind of like, I'm not included when it comes to those kinds of the decision making, right? Like I just kind of have to do things. And that tends to contribute to this feeling of like, yeah, like the adults are in control. The adults kind of tell me what to do, right? And so I kind of follow along. And you'd be surprised how early on like that like sets in for kids. I mean, I've had kids as early as 4 tell me stuff like that, you know, and I'm like, oh, choices, right? Like, what would you like to do? And they're like, I don't know, you pick. Like, I don't get to pick. You know, and of course, I mean, I don't think parents are like, oh, you know, I'm a dictator or anything like that, but we just so often, right, like just forget to like ask or to like have them chime in or like, do you like this? Do you not? Right. And so those are things that I think are really important that can start really early on. Right. And so food for thought. Yes. One of those benefits that we talked about when we're thinking about routines. And so we teach them to be autonomous, right? We can teach them different skills. We teach them that their opinion matter. We teach them that they're part of a team, right? That they can be collaborative. We're teaching them precursor kind of behavior to like complying with certain things, which we want, right? So that when they're facing rules and stuff, there's not this sense of like, oh, all of these different things are being imposed on me. Yeah.
Jessica, I
Um,
think Ingrid had her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the cooking thing because my son he's showing interest in wanting to cook with us, but he's only 2.5, so he can only do so much, and it's like it's hard to know where how much I want to involve him because then even with our space, we don't have a lot of space, so a lot of it has to deal with keeping him safe and making sure nothing falls on him or he touches something sharp. So, I mean, do you have any recommendation of like how much he could be involved, but without getting himself hurt?
yeah. And so at that age, I think a lot of the stuff when would be kind of like diced, or if it was things that we can kind of like have them pull like, you know, like lettuce or whatever we're making like salad and just kind of mix things in. That was usually, you know, the most, and a lot of times like, you know, kids just love like whisking stuff and like mixing bowls. And so sometimes I like have their little a smaller portion set that they would kind of do like on their own and just have them mix it into whatever bowl I was kind of doing. When it came to like fire and stuff, we were very clear, like, okay, once we're moving to the stove, right? Like then you can watch from afar or like set a chair or something, but it was like we can't go near the stove yet. They have like these gloves that I got on Amazon where they're like heat resistant or something, right? And also like resistant to like sharp stuff. And so like by the time they're 4, like I'll give them not like a sharp knife, but something that's pretty dull or like even like a butter knife to like try to slice like tomato or something like that. And they have a really good time doing that. But when there was things that I'm like, okay, this is kind of dangerous. I'm like, okay, you can help me do this, right? Or mix something. My daughter loves to set the table, you know, and yeah, depend because they're like my kids are almost 4 years apart. So what one can do, the other one not necessarily. But it's, you know, having the help with the mixing and stuff and setting a limit around that. Because I was like, no, I want it. I'm like, this is what's safe for you to do, and I would love for you to help me. But if you don't want to help with this, then you know, like mommy has to cook on her own.
Janice, I know that you guys
Jessica.
incorporate a lot of, sorry, I know you guys incorporate a lot of independent tasks in Montessori, and I think that's what Veri was kind of jumping in on. So if you ladies would want to kind of chime in and touch on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, Ingrid, exactly what Susie just said is that the really good thing about Montessori is a lot of this thing, the practical life skills are embedded in the program. And so your kids are learning, right, to be safe. And you'd be surprised to see very little kids using things such as glass or porcelain in the classroom, that we would, as parents, panic and freak out with our little ones, carrying things like that, thinking, oh, they're going to get hurt. But the important thing is, for Montessori, they really take sort of like a 3-period lesson approach to their teachings, right? So there's a lot of like introduction of what the task is, a lot of modeling, and then allowing the child to practice it, right? And making sure that they're doing the practical application with supervision. And then once they sort of master it, right, they can do it on their own, they do it in groups. So I think that's the important thing, is just making your kitchen accessible to your children, right? So like you mentioned, there's different levels, or maybe, there's knives and things like that, but create an accessible section for your child. So lowering things to where they can reach things so that they don't drop things on themselves. And then teaching them about utensils and what things, can cause harm, other things, this is how we use, this is a responsible way of using materials, right? Or tools in the kitchen, teaching them about the oven and safe ways of using it, right? But you'll be supervising them, you're doing it together at home, which is nice. And what's really great is it'll build their independence, all right? So that they feel more and more confident as they keep doing the activities. And then you can start seeing like, okay, they've pretty much mastered that, so let's move them on to like something else in the kitchen. And so you keep them engaged, and they're learning all of their practical life skills as much as they're feeling confident in themselves and feeling safe being in the kitchen.
And if I can just chime in, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So this is Miss Janice. So to just give some very specific examples, and thank you, Veri, for clarifying that. But in our classrooms, we are seeing some materials there that we call, and they fall under the food preparation curriculum. So it's so cute to see the children when they're showing interest and when they're getting involved, and they're very engaged, so focused as well when they are doing these activities. For the food preparation part of our curriculum, we do it in multiple steps. We start with, from the toddler classroom, for example, we have the Velcro cutting materials that we introduce there. And then that progresses on, that once they get into the pre-primary age group, they're actually encouraged to do some cucumber slicing. We also have banana cutting and apple slicing and orange juicing. And for those activities, after they get their 3-period lesson that Veri mentioned earlier, they're encouraged to do it themselves. We also have some non-kitchen tools activities such as napkin folding. And that is very much part of food preparation and, roles and responsibilities in the kitchen. Pouring water, pouring juice, like those are just some of the things that we do in the classroom that also translates to some of the life skills or skills that they do at home. So yeah, Kai is definitely doing some practice in the classroom.
Yeah. And I will say also, we definitely have our developmental like milestones and markers, but some kids, right, like show some skills very early on. And so you also want to like, be mindful of that. And so for example, both of my kids are so different. My son is really, has a hard time like with like fine motor skills and things like that. So there are some things that I was just like, okay, do I really want to chance it? But there were things that, like for my daughter, for example, at a much younger age, like I trusted her, right? With like, say, a knife where, with my son, like I can't, but they're so different in terms of their abilities, that those are also things, right, that we want to take into the same thing with like, my child is so young, I don't know that they're going to understand, or like, is it just kind of like going through the motions to like have them be part of a little meeting where we're going to like start routines, right? We never know necessarily like just how young or how much they'll take in. And so I think it's always better to err on the side of, I'd rather like include them, and I'm not going to assume that they're like too young for something, right? Kind of like there, if you will. Okay.
And
Okay.
I mean, like for the frequency and how often you would include them. I mean, it wouldn't be ideal to include them every time because, you know, with life and how hectic it can get. So it would just be kind of like when you can get it in, that's when you can just kind of slowly introduce it. But, you know, like with the reality of things, it's just like it's so fast paced that I just can't have them in there every time.
Yes, and there's definitely that. So a lot of the like those types of things I would kind of start off on the weekend because there's less of a hectic, you know, and even just like with introducing a routine and like if I'm going to add a new component, right, to my routine, I would always start on a Saturday because I would know, right? Like, okay, we're not going to be late for school if I'm trying to like do this thing, or I'm not going to be late for pickup, or you know what I mean? And so like there's certain things that I kind of like test run during the weekend. And so, and sometimes those were like the rules, right? Where it's like, okay, on the weekend we can do this, right? Like during the week, you know, we can do this, or like we can pick one meal like on a Sunday, right, that we're going to do at some point in the week that I know I can incorporate the kids, right? And I'd say, okay, it'd be like on a Tuesday or on a Friday, right? And so, and they get to pick their days. And so, again, right, still kind of including them in the process. But at the end of the day, I'm kind of like, okay, these are, I'm dictating, right, like what my schedule looks like. And I kind of know so that I'm not like, oh, all frantic trying to like make them a part. But that's wonderful, right? To like, how do I make them a part of it where it's not going to like overly stress me out?
And Ingrid,
Yeah.
one way is to maybe have them set the table, right? Or maybe pour the drinks. If you're not wanting to create the opportunities for them to like, you don't have the time, like you're cooking, or maybe it's something major and you just want to get to it quickly. It always helps. Like with my son, I always tell him, oh, you know, set the table or do something that they've already mastered and can do easily without getting in your way and things. And then that way they feel like they're part of the whole activity or mealtime.
Process.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. I think that's
That's a good tip.
and in different areas also, right? But like I think those are really key things to kind of keep in mind. It's not just that I want to include them, but realistically, right? Is it feasible and like to do it, and how often do I get to do that, right? And so I think the overarching idea is we want everybody to feel successful, right? And so, and to have these opportunities. And if I really want to do this for my kids, but it's really going to stress me out, that's not a good, right, kind of like exchange, if you will. Like it really, like the benefits kind of have to like balance out with like, okay, what are the other stressors? Because if I'm really stressed out, I'm more likely to maybe like snap, right? Or to like, you know, like be super like in a rush for something and like not be as mindful, or like it becomes not fun. And so, right, we want to make sure that we don't lose sight of those things just because we want to like give the kids the opportunity. And so like balancing out, right? Like, okay, how many opportunities can I provide for this without, again, right, really stressing myself out, like stressing out the kids, right? And then taking into account like, okay, what are their skills right now? You know, and so that way it's also like they're not like disappointed if you know you include them in doing something and then they're like not able to kind of like do it. So thank you for asking. I really appreciate that. Research, right, on why these things help. So routines really help, right, with the development of all of these different like skills, including memory, problem solving, like emotional regulation, a lot of executive functioning kind of skills. And so I know for a lot of parents, you know, that I work with, there's a lot of an emphasis on like cognitive like skills and abilities, and like making that like, I want to make this like a learning opportunity, if you will. And so sometimes other things might take a hit. Like sometimes I have to like convince parents like, okay, adding some playtime would be beneficial to your routine. And they're like, but why, right? Like, why play? And, you know, and so there's a big component that comes, right, like to finding the different ways that kids really build their skills, right? Play is a language that children use and makes most people like feel really good, right? Play is something that we can incorporate into like our routines. It's another way that we can actually facilitate like having these routines, right? Like kind of like take place. Like I said before, we can schedule things into our routines that will allow for stuff to kind of go into like automaticity, right? Which is that area of our brain we're just like kind of like co-pilot, if you will. And so I don't really have to think about these things. Like I know that I brush my teeth and this is the way that I do it, right? And then I know that we have dinner when we come home, or I have to like change into my pajamas and whatever it is that you set up for your routine, right? But all of that, like there's working memory, right? There's like long-term memory things involved. And then there's things where now it's just such a part of my day-to-day that I don't have to remind my kids to like, okay, when we get home, you're going to do this and you're going to do that. And you're right. It just kind of happens nicely and automatically. And that also gives them space to like learn, right. And to absorb other things that are kind of like happening in their environment and they're trying to teach them, because there isn't all of this fatigue and, you know, you're not completely stressed and strained because you're trying to teach and you're trying to like get them to like comply and, you know, like rally everybody together. And so there's a lot of benefits to that. And so including, right, like I said earlier, if you're completely stressed out and you're trying to set some kind of structure or get them ready, right, to like do homework or for dinner, and all of those things are stressful, then your ability, right, to also like support your kids when they're become like emotional dysregulated, which is more likely to happen in the context, right, when we're emotionally dysregulated, right, like that combination is not a super helpful one, right? And so it's like, okay, I know that when I give my kid a lot of like demands, or there's a lot of expectations, or maybe during this time because we're just getting home from school, there's going to be a lot of pushback. I need to be good in order to facilitate, right, that emotional regulation if that kind of happens. And keeping in mind that this is kind of where kids, right, lose it, and we lose routines, we lose, right, their enthusiasm about wanting to like cooperate or participate in a routine can happen when we are all emotionally dysregulated, right? And so like introducing these small tidbits, right, which is why we like start simple. You don't have to have, right, like this long, complicated schedule. If you start with like 2, 3 things, you can gradually add to those things, right? Like as they get older or as they master one. And again, now their executive functioning, right? Like their prefrontal cortex and all that, they're kind of firing because now they've been active, right? And so there's this like, oh, learning is going to happen, whether they want to call it that or not. And it's safe. Like my mom's not all stressed out when she's trying to get me to do homework or she's trying to get me to pay attention, right? It's like, okay, everybody, like now we're moving to this, right? Like it helps us with transitioning. And so there's a lot of different things that happen, right? In terms of like being able to have all these like really amazing cognitive skills develop, right? Especially with executive functioning. Now for kids that we kind of start to see have maybe some inattentive kind of stuff happening, or maybe they're a little more hyperactive, you want a lot of these things to kind of go into that automatic part of the brain so that the stuff that they're going to really have a hard time with and challenge with, right, like their brain can actually like exert the energy into those difficult tasks. Not like, oh, it takes me half an hour to get my kid to brush their teeth, you know, because they forget this. And I'm not lying, like both of my kids, right, like neurodivergent, they both have ADHD, myself included. And sometimes I'm like, what happened? I thought you were like gonna do this. Like if I tell them to do something at the wrong time of the day, and they're like, oh, like I lost my way. You know, I was gonna do that. And then I started doing this thing. And so it's like, okay, right. And I'm like, this is why we do this, right, at this time. Or this is why, you know, because I don't have to remind them in the morning, they get up, they brush their teeth, right, they get ready, great. If for whatever reason I have something to do later on and I need them to do like get their clothes or something midday, I'm going to lose them somewhere in the process, right? Because it's outside of their routine. And so again, it makes life so much easier, not just for you, but for them. You know, and learning sets them up to be able to actually like benefit from stuff. Like, and I don't know how many of you have to do homework with kids yet or not, but if you don't have a routine kind of set up for that, it can take, and I've had parents like say this to me, like hours just to get them to sit, you know, and if they do worksheets to get them through like one worksheet because they're not used to it. They rather go do something else, right? And so if you're able to kind of establish a routine around that. So a lot of times I'm working either on reports or presentations, documentation or something, like I'll have my daughter or something come with me because we wait for my son. I'm like, okay, it's working time, right? It's like, we're working girls or whatever. And, like we're business women. And like, so I sit on one side and she sits on the other and we're like computer, laptops. And she feels all grown up, right? Kind of like doing that. If you have older kids, right? And like the older kiddo has already like their routine set up where they're doing homework, bring them in. Like I would never deter my daughter, even when she was like 1 and my son was trying to do like his homework. Like she would sit and doodle or do whatever, but she was so excited to sit right with him. And like the thought of doing homework with her big brother was like a really big thing. Right. And so those are fun ways where you did the work with one, just add the other one on, right? If you have that second one. But again, prime opportunities for like relationship building, helping them have like good expectations about what they have to do and when they have to do it, and learning, right? Being able to focus like their like energy, if you will, like on the things that you actually want to teach them in that moment, not all kinds of other stuff. Sleep. Sleep is a tricky one. A lot of people have different reasons for why sleep is really difficult. About 50% of a lot of the sleeping challenges come with not having like a steady sleep routine or like good sleep hygiene. And a lot of times routines really help with that, right? So it's like we start quieting down maybe an hour before we actually go to bed. And so the sleep routine doesn't happen 15 minutes before we go to sleep, right? It's a process so that we also slow down. I mean, maybe I'm an outlier, but I don't think I am. If I go from like doing work on the computer and then jumping into bed, there is no way I'm going to go to sleep immediately. It's not going to happen. It takes time for my brain to kind of like turn off and like adjust, right? And so the same thing with kids. So I would always say like, give yourself about, especially when you're just starting out, for younger ones, at least 30 minutes before you go to bed, and have, like devices and all of that stuff. If your kids use those things, at least an hour before they go to sleep. So I think studies show that as long as you're exposed to like that blue light, your brain doesn't start to produce melatonin until 2 hours after that exposure. So if melatonin, right, is what your brains kind of naturally need to produce melatonin to tell you, okay, it's time to sleep. If we're like on our phones and, or doing things like that, like immediately before bedtime, it's going to take time. Like nobody's above that. Right. And so helping them kind of like settle down, or, unless your kids have like sensory kind of like needs when they like to be running around. And sometimes people say, oh, that'll tire them out. It might, right? But depending on the child, it can also activate them. So you want to give yourself like time from those kind of activities. You can engage them in like coloring or something that doesn't require so much energy. And so they're still active, but their bodies are kind of like slowly like winding down. Okay. Any questions? I don't see anything in the chat, so hopefully pacing is good. The whole decision fatigue and stress for parents. So a lot of people find it really stressful at the very beginning when they're like trying to implement routines, that they often kind of like, okay, I'm just not going to do this right now. Now, I really encourage people to kind of push past that. So in the behavioral world, right, there's this notion, and I'm sure it's backed by a lot of science because I've known a lot of people that do this. They say that it takes our kids 2 trials, right, to train us to do or not do something. Right. So it's like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. That was overwhelming and that was stressful. And by the second time that they don't want to comply, we decide like, okay, that I'm going to put that right to the side for now because it's not something that I'm going to do. And sometimes we never revisit it. Yes. And so if we can push past, right, that angst, or push past, right, like discouragement, because we all feel it, it really does create a situation where, believe it or not, life can become more predictable, even for you. Yes. So I know that it's not ideal initially, but like I said before, if, say, even with bedtime, yes, so let's say we're trying to establish a bedtime routine and we're just like struggling so much, right? And they keep getting out of bed, you know, and you name it, it's happening. Maybe we'll start with, okay, we're going to get ready for bedtime at this hour, which means we're going to like brush our teeth. I don't know if bath time is part of that, right? But even establishing those kind of precursor things before like they actually hit the bed is really important, right? Because that'll like flag or indicate them, like to indicate to them, like, okay, the day is going to end soon, right? Like I'm in the bath, usually put on my pajamas after, right? You decide at what point the teeth brushing comes into play. And then like, if you're going to read to them, at what point do you read a book? But if you do that, let's say for a week straight, again, right, when you start to engage in that behavior, like, it kind of cues them. It's bedtime, right? Or we're going to get ready for bedtime, at least. And so when you announce it's bath time, if your kids are have an aversive, right, to hearing the word bedtime, that will also begin to cue their brain that it's time to kind of start settling down. Susie, I think I got like there's a question in the chat. I don't know if you want to check
Yeah,
it.
I have a couple of things in the chat. So Adriana, who happens to be my childhood best friend here to support us today, says maybe we can circle back to the bedtime thing. But my sister asked me last night why her daughters 9 and 4 start getting hyper right before bedtime. I'm not a mom, so I don't know the answer, but I've heard this from so many other moms.
So anybody have any ideas, or does anybody like, you can just kind of thumbs up or whatever if you have something similar happening in your home where it seems to like amp them up instead of getting them ready to like go to
That's
bed?
happened to me before, and if anybody else has any experiences with this, but I noticed that for us, it tends to happen, surprisingly enough, when the kids are overtired.
Hmm.
And it's very ironic, right? Because that's not what you expect, because you know that it's, let's say, for whatever reason, we went outside of our routine, we came home late, or something threw us off. And you know, I know that they're very, very tired, and I'm looking at them and I'm like, what the heck did they eat? They're like bouncing off the walls, and I know they're exhausted. And it happens to us a lot during those times.
I just want to say she has a pretty solid bedtime routine with them, but it's still so hard for her to it's like they know it's coming and they just want to get their last. I don't know. But I'm there pretty often during that time because I try to help her settle them down. But I see it too, and she's like, "Is this normal?" I'm like, "Well, I don't know, but I've heard this a lot from other moms that they go crazy at night."
Yeah. And so and I'm not sure, you know, in terms of like what time like bedtime starts, but you know, to speak to Susie's point, which might contribute to a certain extent on this end, when you have, you know, you have to like push through and you can't fall asleep and you're exhausted, we tend to get this adrenaline rush, right? And so all of a sudden we are pushing through, right? And we're like up, and when we want to sleep, we cannot sleep because now we're just like on this like adrenaline rush where it's really hard to like come down from that. And that happens to our kids, right? So a lot of times when like it's like, oh, tire them out, it's like, because you're just going to get the opposite effect, right? Because again, right, humans, brains, it's like, okay, now we're so tired and we're still like doing stuff, so we must need the added energy, right? And so it's like, let me give you like, right, like a quick dose of adrenaline. And so if you think about what like it wakes you up, right? It like keeps you going even when you don't want to go anymore. And so when it is too, like when you're pushing bedtime too far off, right? And again, sometimes we do it as like, well, they must not be falling. They're not falling because they're not tired, because they have all this energy. And so usually what we often recommend is like try moving it half an hour early to see if that helps, right? Or if maybe they have some sensory stuff going on, we can like look at what are some of the things that they're engaging in, right? When it's like bedtime. And so Is it like a last hurrah? Is it like my body just feels dysregulated and I need to do something, right, to kind of like get the wiggles out, if you will, and then I can like settle myself down to sleep. And so, for example, if anybody in here is the type of person that like needs, like starts to pace for whatever reason, right? We do that after a certain amount of time that we may be sitting, or we start to like move our legs because our body's telling us like, I need input of this sort, right? And so for kids, sometimes when, depending on what it is that they're doing, and now they still have all of this like energy in their bodies, they might need to do like, you know, like this is where it's like wall push-ups, depending on, right, the type of energy that they're, because it doesn't require a lot of running or anything like that, right? But it gives you that proprioceptive kind of like your muscles, that input, and still like some sense of motion. And so sometimes creating like a structured, right, like activity routine, if you will, if kids are really kind of like very active, not so much like if they're just laughing and like messing around with each other, then it's okay, we can start half an hour early, and then we can set a time slot, like, you know, like again, structured time where we can like play and we can, you know, do whatever. And but we need to go to bed at this time, right? So now it's like you're creating a space and part of the routine so that they can actually like, you know, go crazy if they want.
We
That
have
make
a
sense?
good one. Sorry, go ahead, Betty.
I think it's important to take note, like notice, because routines take a while to really be established, right? You can't overwhelm your child with like, okay, here's this beautiful chart, and tomorrow you're going to master it. It's going to take time. So step by step, you know, if they're like doing their morning routine and they accomplish 2 steps there, it's like, great, celebrate it, right? Until they've really mastered, and really look forward to their routine, because part of the routine is they feel safe in it, right? My son really struggles with going to sleep. That was something that we really battled with. He would get that hyper sort of activity at night, and then would ask for food, right? So similar to your question, Adriana. And it did help when my husband's a lot better with consistency and really, you know, encouraging my son to stick to a schedule, right, when he doesn't want to, and really helping him see the benefits of it. So it took us a while, but I think the more he practiced that routine, the easier it got. And it's just a matter of helping them understand why, you know, rest is really important. Reminding them, like in the morning when they're exhausted and they're in a bad mood and they don't want to go to school, and remind them, oh, it's because you didn't sleep, right? That's why it's so important we go to bed on time. And then when they don't want to go to bed at night, remind them, remember when you didn't want to go to school? Remember you were in a bad mood, you had a bad day. It's because you don't get rest. So helping them understand the importance of sleep, but also just journaling, you know, like why, when it happens, because like somebody mentioned, sometimes our routines are different, right? So we have a party, we have a meeting at school, we come home late from work. I know it happens to me all the time. So I'm cooking dinner at like 9 p.m. as opposed to 5 p.m. or 4 p.m. So all of those shifts in our routine, in our schedules, can impact our children, and we just have to be aware. If it's a one-time thing, you know, it's not such a big deal. But if it's something consistent that you notice, you know, like what Jessica was saying, maybe they need like a little weighted blanket, you know, maybe they need the security of like you going to bed with them. So sometimes that helps my son. I just lay down with my son until he falls asleep, and then I can just go on with my time after that. We all go to bed, we shut off the lights, we're like, it's bedtime, we're all going to sleep. So they don't feel like they're missing out. Because sometimes I feel like there's a little FOMO in there, like fear of missing out, and they just want to stay up with us, right? So everyone's different, but just kind of journaling, you know, why does it happen? When does it happen? Did they eat something late? Did they eat too much sugar? Anything like that, so that you kind of know what's going on. And really trying to stick to your routine as much as you can, but not beating your kids up or yourself up if they don't stick to it.
And this is also when,
sorry, go ahead, Jess. There's another question that I'll ask right after you're done.
no, I was going to say, this is also when you can really like sticker charts and rewards and things like that can come into play, because a lot of times, you know, when we do like reward like systems, it's not just to teach a behavior, but to also like increase motivation, right? Or to establish motivation. And so once they, like they conquer that, great. Then we can start figuring things out. But sometimes it's like, okay, let's see how long we can go, right? Like if we can get into bed by this time, right? Like we all get stickers, and then, if they're older, you can do like a token kind of reward system where it's okay, you can trade in your stickers, right? Or we have to have this many stickers before we like get a prize. And so they have to believe that you're going to like follow through though. That's the important thing about that. But it really does help to motivate that behavior. Right. And so I always encourage that. And there's a lot of different systems for like doing reward stuff that, if maybe any new ideas, we could always kind of like send your way and stuff. But like, yeah.
So related to bedtime, there's a lot of talk about bedtime. Guadalupe asks, any suggestions on how to get a child back on track on their routine? Once we are done and ready for bed, she'll ask for a snack, another book, or wants to play. How do you avoid negotiations?
Don't negotiate.
I agree. No negotiating.
Yeah, like that's a really hard thing, but once you start negotiating, the expectation is that you will continue to negotiate. And so like they have you at that point, right? Because now, and even if you did start negotiating, I mean, and I always say this, and even if they're really little, like, okay, we talked about this, right? We're going to do this. And so by this time, right, there's no need for added snacks or any of those things, right? And so if we have to go to bed at this time, and that's kind of when we're going to bed, I'm going to read a book, give them that structure. And then it's like, no, but mom, it's just like, no, right? That's it. Depending on how old they are, right? Asked and answered is always works wonders because they get tired of hearing that. So if they ask you for something, right, and you've already said no, it's like asked and answered, right? Because you're a broken record and they don't want to hear a broken record. They want you to engage, right? But if you're just engaging with the exact same thing, they're like, oh, forget it, right? And they'll probably get like frustrated and annoyed with you for like doing that. But yeah, the best thing is not to begin negotiating. Because then you'll be negotiating on a lot of things. And it's like, well, it was okay that time. Why are you not negotiating with me again? And so it's right. This is where like that setting that limit is going to come into play, right? And just kind of keeping to that structure. And so if you do find yourself like returning the child back, right, this is where not giving them a lot of attention, right, for the behavior. It's like, okay, we're just going to go back to your, right, go back to bed, not do a lot of talking, and then walk out, right? If that's kind of the situation you have happening. And so if you have two kiddos and you have one kind of like complying, it's like you really make a big deal about the one that is like engaging in the behavior that you want to see, right? Like, oh my goodness, I am so proud of you. And I know that it's so hard, but you're staying in bed, right? And you're trying to like relax and go to sleep. Oh, right. And just like give them all these rewards. Now people are like, oh, but what about the other ones? And I was like, whoa, usually it motivates them to kind of like, oh, my sister, right, or my brother getting so much attention because they're doing this. Like, well, if I want that, then I need to engage in similar behavior. Yes. And so that's when you can use other kids as a model. And we can kind of give some, like, once you started negotiating, like how to kind of walk away or like fade out that behavior. But usually best thing is not to start to begin with.
I know something that's worked for me with my boys is, using the if then tactic. So I'll say something like, maybe Izzy is asking for a snack. Okay, if you go to bed now and you go to sleep, tomorrow mommy's going to give you the snack that you want when you get home from school. Or first we go to sleep, and then in the morning, you can have a little bit of extra time before we go to school to play. And with Sam, it was a little bit harder to kind of get him to comply with that. But eventually he did that too. And now he's like, he'll try me, like, oh no, but I want to. And then after like the second time, he'll be like, okay. And they just like, as long as you stay consistent and follow through. So don't say, if you do this, then you'll get this, and then don't follow through with it, because then they're not going to believe you. And next time you try that, it's not going to work.
Yeah, you got to be credible. for sure. Sergio, I think you were going to say something, and I'm not sure if you had a comment or.
Oh, I was gonna say basically they you give them an inch, they take a mile, so be careful with that. We have routines with them, and especially with this little angel right here, who is running amok right now. But like there's certain times that when I'm more strict than others, then she's gonna say that she doesn't want to be around me, and then she wants to be with mom.
Mhm,
So like right now, mom's job is to get her brother to sleep, and that takes a couple of minutes.
mhm,
And then we work on and focus on her primarily. So we do. So she used to be at the point where it was I need some milk, and so we got suckered into that giving in an inch, and they take a mile. And then we figure it out. Like it wasn't instinctively, but eventually we got out of that by just refusing, just saying no. We have water. If you're thirsty, drink water. And now she has a cup of water right there, and then she'll wake up, in the middle of the night. And that's the other thing. It's just like we have the problem of her waking up in the middle of the night and having to go in there and rescuing from her dream or whatever she had in mind, or her dreams have everything to do with what she dealt with in school. Um, but we we used to be really good with having her go to sleep around 7 o'clock as an infant, to
mhm.
the point when she got her own bed. That's when everything just went all over the place. She started going to sleep at 8. She started going to sleep at 9 sometimes. And we figured out that when she gets really excited and emotional, and when she has family over, she wants to be around them.
Yeah,
So those are our issues with this one.
got it. Yeah, and I think thank you
Wait,
for sure.
no,
For
I
sure.
know.
Hi. It's always, I think, really important to keep those things in mind, right? Like, so if we are going to have family over and let's say it's a weekend or something, right? Like, is it feasible to like have them stay out for an hour, right? But that's something that you will like, okay, we're going to stay up, but remember on Monday we do this, or on Sunday night, right? We go back to our routine. And if we can't do that, then the next time family comes, we're not staying up. But being mindful of, right? Because I mean, we don't want to be like, oh no, like, we're cold or not, but it's being able to set, right, like those limits where it's like, again, gentle but firm. And so we don't have to get like upset. And there are going to be times where like we do have to like listen, right? But those should be the exceptions, right? Like they shouldn't be like the everyday kinds of things, things that we do.
Yeah, it was a good exception. It was my son's baptism, and her family was our family. My wife's family was from out of town, so it was. It's not like she gets to see that side of the family every week, So it was really special for her, and she just kept saying like, "Where's her grandma? Where's her uncles?" And it was just amazing for her, and it was like the first time that she's actually remembering them. So it was very special.
Yeah.
And at the same point in time, it's just like it breaks the routine just a little bit, sets us back just a little bit.
Mhm.
But we know we have to be more firm as the weeks go on when we don't have to see them.
Yeah. Right. And so, I mean, and again, I think that's the beauty of like when you, for the most part, have an established routine, right? Sometimes like, oh, we didn't do it for like 2 days and now it's so difficult to do. But it's like once you establish and you lay down the foundation, right? It's a lot easier to kind of get back on that path than it was like starting from like square one, right? And so no matter where you are, you'll never be at a place where you're completely starting from scratch unless so much time has gone by, right? That neither of you have like remember what it was like to like sit and right tolerate all of that good stuff. But yeah, knowing that you're going to make exceptions, knowing right life is imperfect, and so being adaptable, but how to teach your kids, right, that on occasion we can't follow the routine for whatever reason, right? The expectation is that we are slowly going to work our way back, so that it's not like, oh, it's a free for all. And then, they go back to doing different things. But yeah, it's important to keep that in mind, because sometimes it's like, no, we can't deviate at all. It's like, right, that's not real life. And also if you expect that of yourselves, right? Like, so say like, before it's like practice makes perfect. Now we say like practice makes better, because it's never gonna really be perfect, right? Like life has its funny way of like throwing all these different things at you. And so it's important to know that that's going to happen. And so it's more about, how do I get back when the setback occurs, versus like, oh, I need to make sure that the setbacks don't occur. That's not as realistic, right? And so things to definitely keep in mind and be kinder to yourself about when it comes to that. In terms of like where the routines really make a big difference, right? So the way that you start off your day is really big, right? Which subsequently also ties back to the way that you end your day. Because you can say like, if I don't get enough sleep, or we're both tired, right? The way that our morning is going to like go is probably not going to be the smoothest. Right. And so it's like, how do these things kind of like piggyback? And so we can start off morning routines, right? And again, like, I think this is like really like, when we wake up, what are the things that we do when we wake up? Right? Is that like you brush your teeth, you get dressed, or like you have breakfast first, right? Like, what does your child like do, right? Like, I don't know if at this point they're getting dressed on their own, if you're getting them dressed, right? But being able to kind of indicate like, okay, I'm going to go in and I'm going to get them ready, but this is part of our routine, right? So they know that after we get dressed, then like we're going to like then go to school or whatever that is. But when you initiate, right, the smoother your morning goes, like usually the better your day is going to be, and your kids' day. Like, I'm always really big on, oh, I don't want my kids to start off the morning, right? Like not on a good note or on a positive note. And it's hard because I have a 12-year-old and I have a 9-year-old, very different, right? And we have to like go and come because my son has like gets bused. And so we have to leave pretty early. And if I fall behind even like 10 minutes, it can feel so rushed, right? And so it's like, okay, what can I do? So I wake up half an hour earlier so that I'm not like, right, like on the clock. So if we do have a setback of 5 minutes, I can afford that. And so then it's not gonna like, oh my gosh, we're running out. And even, I mean, sometimes you can do everything and you still have that momentum, right? Like we were running, we got to get out of the house. But once you start kind of building things in, I would say like, okay, take some data beforehand. What are the things that cause you the biggest delays in the morning, right? Is it the waking them up on time? Give yourself another 10 minutes, right? If you have to wake them up a little bit earlier, believe it. Some people are like, oh, no, I can't even think about that. It's like, no, you'll like be able to smooth out those 10 minutes because now you have a buffer, right? And so you're just setting the clock a little bit early, right? You're not doing an hour. Never do that. That's not it, but like give yourselves like another 10 minutes, right? So is that where I struggle the most, right? Like sometimes my kids, like they always complain like, oh, I'm cold in the morning for whatever reason. So like I turn the heater up slightly before they go. And so now I'm like, it's not cold. So I expect you out of the bed, right? And like into the kitchen. And so, right, like, so taking note of the things that might create those challenges when you're trying to set a routine might really help. Right. And again, not making like overly complicated. And so those are the things, right, that will set you up for success. Right. But always start on a weekend, like I said, because you will have time to play with it. So if you are waking them up 10 minutes early, right, you have time to adjust. If you're trying to wake up earlier, you have time to adjust, right, to like the waking up early. And so I would never say like on a Monday, start it off, because there could be a lot of different hiccups and it can become so stressful that you're like, forget the whole routine. Like I'm done. And I've had several parents at times like, I tried to do this and it didn't work, and then we were all late. And so, yeah, so I always say on the weekends, right, there's less pressure. So if you're late, right? Then you can like figure out what went wrong or like what was a challenge. Same thing, right, with like getting them, if they're still going to like nap time. And sometimes, we'll talk about the weekend because I know a lot of the kids are in school for a while and that's kind of where they take their naps. I would probably say communicate with the teachers, right? So it's like, what is their routine at school when they go down for a nap? Like, do they respond well to it so that you can kind of like piggyback and implement something similar at home, right? Like you don't have to like reinvent the wheel. It's if something is working, what is working, right? Sometimes, oh, Sergio?
Yeah, so a lot of the times with the app, we see their nap times, and a lot of the times we like to keep that regimen the same exact time so that we know that, okay, my son fell asleep at 9 o'clock and he woke up at 9:45 or something like that. And with my daughter, 12:30 and woke up at 2:20 or something like that. So that's the same
Mhm.
thing we try to implement at the same point in time so that she has that same routine. So it works. Um, the only thing that doesn't work very well is the sleep time.
Got it. Yeah. But it is like if there, and this is where I always encourage, right, communication, like with the school, especially if they're working on different things from like just like day-to-day stuff, right? And they have their routines. It's don't stress yourself out. It'll be a lot easier for them to like adopt if you're doing something similar. It doesn't have to be identical, right? Like times can shift a little, but the closer you can kind of get that, right? And then if you try something and that works, and that's something that maybe your kiddo is having a hard time with at school, again, right? Information that you can like pass along. And with more kids, sometimes it's like harder to implement, but I mean, I worked with a lot of teachers who are like, oh, that is so useful. Like we were trying to figure this out, right? Or like parents, I'm like, it seems like when I go to the schools or I visit, like they're not having a similar issue. Like, maybe it's worth having a conversation to see what they're doing. And just that communication, because it's like you're tag teaming, and like making your lives easier and facilitating, right? Not just establishing a routine, but being able to generalize one, right? Which is what we want. We want our kids to be able to generalize behavior for the most part, right? Especially positive behavior across different environments. And so if you have that going in two and they're similar enough, then it's not such a huge thing, right? When you go to grandma's or something, and then that you have to implement that, it's like, oh, I'm used to this, right? Like I do this at home, I do this at school, I can do this here. Yeah. And so a lot of that helps with like just helping your kids adjust when things do happen that are maybe outside of, your control, and maybe you do have to leave them for an extended period of time, right? Like a couple of days, a week, whatever. Every kid is different when it comes to like changes in the routine, but the more familiar they are with the routine, and you can then kind of like have them do something similar, like in a new setting, it's so much easier for you, for your child. You don't have to stress out as much, right? For the person that's on the end of like, okay, now this child's going to stay with me temporarily, and all of that like really facilitates. Bedtime also key, right? So we were talking about like, and maybe we could do something like a more focused discussion like on bedtime, Susie, maybe in the future, since it does kind of affect so many different areas. But
Absolutely.
time. Oh, I heard somebody say something. No, no. Okay, sorry. But yeah, what is it that they want? And so sometimes approaching it, right, it's like with your slightly older kids, and not even, they don't have to be that old. If your kids are talking to you, right, it's good enough. I've noticed, right, or mommy's noticed that you have a hard time like falling asleep or like staying in bed. Like, I'm curious, like, what is that about? Is there anything that like I could do to like help? Like getting you ready for bedtime. And so, right, and sometimes they can kind of like, well, I'm scared. It's like, okay, so then do we put in a night light? Right, like maybe we can try that out, right? I'm all about experimenting, and I think that's just because my kids have a fascination with science. So that's always worked really well for me, right? Ever since my kids were little, let's experiment, right? Let's figure out like what makes this work, right? And if it doesn't, and there's something like if we need to tweak something or change something, like we collect our data, right? And so usually my rule is we do it for a week, and if we need to change it, then we tweak at that time. And that's always worked. And so if you have something similar, like sometimes like social stories, right? It's like, oh, we write about, and Susie, I can give you an example of like a social story, but it's usually like in the first person, right? And so it's like, when I go to bed, I have to do this and I have to do that. If I get scared, I can turn on the night light, or I can get a lovey, right? And so now you're addressing the problem, right, in first person. So the kiddo, it's like this is about me, this is what I'm going to do. And you're giving them solutions to kind of navigate or manage whatever that difficulty is, right? And if I'm able to stay in bed, then I get to do this, right? Or I'll get like an extra bedtime story. If I go to bed sooner, whatever the prize might be. But sometimes it helps, you know, like older kiddos when they're maybe experiencing some anxiety, right? But it's always worth checking in. Like, oh, instead of like, you know, assuming it's like, I wonder what's going on. You know, like, can we talk about it? You know, I'm curious. Like, do we need to start bedtime earlier? I noticed that, you know, right before bed, you want something to eat, but I know that you've had enough to eat, right? So this is kind of what I'm thinking. What do you think? Just in terms of like moving forward, and this also happens when kids get older. You want to really become good at coming up with mutual acceptable or mutual satisfactory right solutions, which means it doesn't just have to work for me. Like my kid has to be on board, because if they're not, you're going to get so much more pushback. Right. And so sometimes they might say like, I don't know that. I don't know that that sounds fair. It's like, okay, well, what sounds fair to you? This is the only time when we negotiate, is when we're setting a rule, where we're establishing something, because then it's like, okay, we're going to try this that we mutually agreed on, right? And we're going to put it into effect. So after that, there's no negotiating unless you run into a hiccup later. And then outside of the bedtime, right, or whatever time it is that you're establishing a routine, you can come back to the drawing board. Okay, I don't know that this works very well. So this is my right, like my solution. What do you think, right? And you kind of have this conversation. But, and some people are like, oh, that's negotiating with terrorists. I'm like, no, because you're not negotiating in the moment, right? You're having a conversation to kind of set things up. That's a really big difference, right? When it comes to like, oh, I don't know that I want to like have that. But if your kid feels heard and they feel understood, it doesn't feel like you're imposing things on them. Right. And if there's like a skill deficit or issue, right, that's creating or adding to the problem, you also want to be aware of that. Right. Because what if my kid is genuinely completely freaked out, and the reason why he acts out before bedtime is because he's so afraid of going to bed, or he's so afraid of the dark, that maybe I need to kind of run some interference, you know? And so you want to have that information, right? So that kids don't think like, oh, my parents are just being mean, because they're going to have absolutely no qualms giving you a hard time if they experience you as just being mean and unreasonable. Right? Playtimes, really important. Their abilities to develop right skills to engage and interact with their peers carries them, you know, so far. And they don't have to have a ton of like friends, but if they can have and learn how to maintain, right, like a small group, that really is correlated oftentimes, even with people that are like, say, on the spectrum and like have difficulties with like social interactions or like social anxiety. If they just have one or two friends, that reduces, right, anxiety levels a lot, because now you're not kind of managing all this stuff on your own, right? It's important for them to kind of like start building those skills like early on, right? And so you want to foster playtime, whether it be with you at home, right? Because it's like, oh, you're so fun to be with, my kid. I want to spend time with you. And so sometimes we get so caught up in all the craziness. 5 minutes of quality playtime, right, does so much more than like 30 minutes if you're just kind of like half there, half not, right? And so a lot of it is about quality, and like just communicating to them, like, I want to spend time with you. I want to be here with you, right? Even if it's just like, even if I only have 5 minutes, I want to spend those 5 minutes with you. Or like, you know, in our case, it's like with the family, right? So what can we do? And sometimes, right, this is where they learn negotiating, not with us, but it's like, I have two, they're very different in age. It's like, okay, you get to pick one day, you get to pick another day, right? And that's kind of what's helped, because otherwise, like having them agree on something, like playtime would be over by the time they would agree, right? And so again, it's like we're playing with things, right? And it's like, okay, we struggled a lot with that. This is our solution. Everybody on board? Right. And so like you learn to negotiate, right, and navigate the situations. But big picture, it's important because they will learn different skills. Right. Like with my kids that are, both of them, like I said, are on the spectrum. And so sometimes like we like kind of role play, if you will. Right. So my son might say something and I'm like, oh, but I'm like, okay, we gotta like rethink that one, right? Or like redeliver. And so I'd rather me be the one to say something, right, and teach him, right, or my daughter, than to have somebody else come in and like say something mean or come from a place where they're just, right, not taking into consideration like what their needs are. Right. And so also thinking about it in that way, like if your kids are struggling in some area, it's right, have a scheduled playtime, right, where you can kind of set up opportunities to like see these behaviors play out or to work with them on that, right? So if your kid has a hard time with sharing, make it a really big deal, right, to like teach them how to share in that time that you like are playing, right? And so those are opportunities, again, where you give them that extra time and love that they need, right, in a way that they feel like it's fun and they're enjoying themselves. And really, like, my kids don't always get that I'm like teaching them like scripts, right? Or like kind of like, okay, this is right, like we gotta like tweak this so that it doesn't come across in this way, because I also want to give them a break sometimes, right? From like, oh, I have to like change my behavior or like always be like thinking about all of these things. So creates a fun environment, a fun space for that. I know we talked about power routines and like how they take place, or they're kind of like yeah, like there's a lot of precursor stuff that's taught right within the Montessori kind of like program. Lydia, I don't know if you want to like chime in or
Yeah, sure. So one of the things why I believe the Montessori approach is really something that is going to help children, help us as parents and even educators close that achievement gap for our children, is because so much of like what we're talking about, routines, is already embedded in the goals of Montessori. So Montessori, has a goal of like what they call the normalization of children. And it's really to build their independence through all of their activities and their work time and the way that the program is structured, to give them that confidence they're going to need and to provide that security that they need so that when they're in the classroom, they really are focused on their learning. They can deeply engage in the activities and their socialization with other kids. And so that's the beauty of it, is that routines are very much a part of Montessori, even though, most people will think that Montessori is like, oh, you just let a kid do whatever they want. They have the freedom to just run around the classroom, and there's no real structure to Montessori. That's sort of the myth out there, right? But quite opposite to that is Montessori is very extremely structured, and it does have the flexibilities within that structure to allow and empower our children to be more independent. It really encourages the self-regulation, right? So because they have that predictability and they have a very stable environment, then they learn to manage their emotions a lot better. And they really practice a lot of self-control as they work with other kids, with their leads in the classroom. And a lot of this will lead to like skill development. And the skill development is really done a lot through the practical life skills, through their social interactions, and just this goal to increase their development at this early age. They do a lot of this, or like a lot of the routine things are consistent with a curriculum in Montessori, right? So when you look at the entire schedule, so you can work with your teachers, your son or daughter's teachers or leads, and ask them about the schedule, right? Ask them about the activities, the different lessons they have within the classroom, so that you kind of get a sense of what they're doing in the class and how it's developing their skills. But if you look at the whole routine, they have like the morning greeting or circle time, right? They have what they call work time or structured work cycles, where it's like 2 to 3 hours of time where they work independently or in a group. They have snack time, they have indoor, outdoor play. And within all of this schedule, they're making choices, right? They're making choices for their activities. They're making choices for maybe snacks, right? They're making choices with their approaches, like they learn different approaches and then they can sort of choose, right? They're making choices and putting things back and different tasks within the class. So that's what's really nice. And it also, the environment in Montessori is extremely consistent. So everything, like if you can see in my background, I know it's really small, but I put this picture up because I love walking into Montessori classrooms. It's like automatically I feel calm. I feel like everything is just in its place and it's in order, which is not normally how we lead our lives, right? And so your kids are entering that space and everything is intentionally, carefully planned and placed. And it's also maintained. So your kids are learning to maintain their classroom, to take care of their belongings, right? To see the value of their materials, and why it's important to take care of our materials and to use them the right ways. So they're learning all of those skills in the classroom that they can now take home, right? They also have a lot of grace and courtesy lessons. So they're being taught to be gracious, to be courteous with their peers. And that's part of a routine too, right? So when they go through their different emotions with a routine, you know, the more they practice grace, the more they practice courtesy, they're going to have grace for themselves when that routine is not fully followed. They're going to be courteous when we have to not negotiate with them, right? And just really keep to a routine. So the more they practice that, the better they are at self-regulating their emotions. But some of the things I thought about giving you guys tips of what you can do at home to support their Montessori training, but also to help you parents feel so much more at peace with our kids, because when we don't have routines, you know, when we just kind of feel all over it, our kids pick up our own energy, right? So I know when I'm a hot mess, my kid is a hot mess. And so it's important that we try to establish as much as we can at home and make it simple, right? So if you're not able to have a full chart and follow things by a time schedule, there's things that you can do that would support their Montessori training, but also be more of a routine-like, safe, predictable environment. So one of the things is like really scan your environment. And like I said earlier, when we were talking about cooking, right, making everything accessible to your child. So if your child has their own play space or bedroom, whatever is their space where they put their toys away, where they have arts and crafts, make sure that you buy or find things within your home that you can utilize as tools to make things accessible. So like I just try to put like little shelves for my son to be able to grab paper, to grab his pens, his scissors, right? Whenever he has to like brush his teeth and things, make sure you have a stool, make things that, you know, he can just reach and do on his own so that I don't have to be handing him things. I don't have to tell him where things are. He can just go and he knows exactly where things are stored. He knows he can access them safely. And so over time, he's just doing things on his own. I'm not even having to guide, right? So I guide a few times and then he just goes at it. So just making sure we do that and we have organized spaces for toys and materials in the house. And then really involving your child. We already talked a little bit about that in practical life. So having them help us cook, set the table, clean, do some gardening, maybe participate in some chores, or have them give them the choice. Like, what do you want to be responsible for? We have, you know, you can set the table, you can water the plants, you can help fold laundry. Have them choose it and then model for them so that they can help you and they feel like they're involved in the responsibilities of the house. Keep to consistent routines, right? So bedtime and morning especially. So teach them about, you know, we brush our teeth, we wash our face, or we wash our hands, we go to the bathroom, we put our pajamas, we take a shower, whatever your routine is, establish that very clearly for your child and, you know, practice it with them. And then eventually they're going to do it on their own. When you say, okay, it's bedtime, they're going to know exactly what the steps are. And you can use the visuals too, if you want to remind them that way. But also for work and play, have a consistent, you know, sort of routine for like we get home, you get a little time to sort of calm down, right? And get some self-play time. And then we have, you know, dinner, and then we have a little work time, and then we have playtime again. However you structure, just make sure you have a little bit of both and that it's something that they know is consistent. And then help them establish self-care. So teaching your child, again, to wash their hands, take care of their belongings as much as they take care of their belongings in the classroom. Take care of our belongings at home too. You know, the value of what we have, and why it's a privilege to be able to have those things, right? So really teaching them to put things away and to care for their things. And then include them in decision making. So create opportunities for them to make choices about anything, activities, meals. Maybe there's a change in routine, you know, one day. And so say, hey, you know, tomorrow we have this party. And so here's what I'm thinking, you know, do you want this or that? But giving them like kind of the options, presenting the options, and then allowing them to choose what they want. And then be intentional about toy selection and like the rotation of your toys, right? So I know in Montessori, they have a lot of puzzles, a lot of blocks and building and sensory bins. So bringing some of that to the home, things that are going to develop their skills and their fine motor skills. And then rotating them as they sort of grow out of toys, right? Or maybe just to keep them engaged, just keep it in rotation. And then keep observing your kids. Get to know your kids. You know them best. We're with them all day long. And so it's really important that you really get to know their interests and how you can adapt activities and things that we do to really engage them. Because the more they're engaged, the more willing they're going to be to stick to a routine.
Yeah. No. Thank you for that, Betty. And so, I mean, I think there's a lot of different like parallels, right, that we can draw. I think one thing, you know, like a myth or misnomer is that if you don't have all these demands and all these things kind of in your child's routine or schedule, then it's like too loose or unstructured. But the idea is that you don't always have to give demand. And that's the beauty of establishing a routine, right? Is even if you focus, you know, and you like on 2-3 things, right, within a routine that you're like setting up, that should eliminate you having to say like, do this or do that or do, you know, because that's kind of the beauty of setting a routine, right? It's like, you don't have to say like, okay, we have to do this and this and this and that, right? It's like, we've worked on this so that I don't have to always be telling you what to do. Yes. And so it provides independence in that way. And so in terms of like just a quick review, I start small. Don't take on like, oh, I need to establish a routine for like all these different things. Like Betty was saying, right? Like big things for you. If it's transitions, right? So, okay, we're going to do morning and then transition from school to home, right? Like a small kind of thing where it's where you do homework, where you snack or whatever, and then bedtime. And then we can, like I said, maybe give out some additional information about like just examples of different bedtime routines or like right potential barriers and stuff. And we can, you know, if we need to kind of do a full thing, then maybe we can do like a full thing. But yeah, also give yourself right like grace and things, right? Like Rome wasn't built in a day, neither is your routine. Life happens. And so I think the big thing is to be consistent, try to stay regulated, right? Even if something is like frustrating. And I think you can like verbalize it and communicate, because I think kids oftentimes act out when they're not, or they don't think it's like it's okay for them to express anger or for them to express frustration or sadness or any of these other emotions, right? That we might feel uncomfortable with. And so it's like, yeah, this is really frustrating, but you know what? I don't have to throw things. I can, you know, like journal or do X, Y, and Z. Now, for you, if you have child who's resisting routines, right? This is where we get creative and fun. Or just check in. I think that's usually like the biggest like challenge is we're imposing things, perhaps. And we don't want to do that. I'm sure we don't like things imposed on us, right? And so we want to make sure that whatever we decide that we're going to implement, we can kind of like stick to. And if we're getting, like I said, all this pushback, it's explore, right? Be curious. Like, don't come from a place of I'm angry. It's like, okay, I'm wondering why. I thought we agreed on this. And, you know, I've noticed it's been challenging. Like, what can we do?
You
Right?
guys, we are at the 7:30 mark. I want to be respectful and mindful of everybody's time. For those of you that want to stick around, we probably have maybe 1 or 2 slides left, just very quickly on some I think, the fun part of trying to incorporate routines into your schedule. So if you want to stick around, please do. We're probably going to go over maybe like another 5 minutes. Totally up to you guys.
Yes. So again, setting a routine, being firm doesn't mean that you have to like be this authoritarian, right? You definitely make things fun. And sometimes it's like, okay, when we transition, right? Like, do I want to add like a 5-minute activity, which when I come home, I'm going to sit with my kid, right? We're going to draw, we're going to color, we're going to dance if there's a lot of like activity, right? And then we're going to either have a snack, and we can, you know, like have things like ready to pull out for like a snack, you know, and just have that be like positive time together, right? So that whole transition doesn't have to be like, oh, right, pulling teeth and getting them to do all these different things. It can definitely be fun, right? Rituals, right? And again, like, so rituals can definitely kind of be like all out, right, routine, but my daughter she loves fashion. So like, it's like a big deal for her to pick out her outfit, since I was always the one picking out her outfit. And sometimes I have veto power. Like if something is not, but I have to tell her, like, you have to trust mommy, okay? Like maybe we could keep the top, but we have to change the shorts, or something like that, right? But it's a special time. She loves that, right? And so my son likes to like geek out with my, you know, with my husband on like facts, and they'll do that for like 10 minutes before bedtime. And then we all kind of reconvene. And just for the record, I mean, it might be like, people are like, oh my gosh, but like my kids start like, they're in bed by like 8:30, and I have a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old. But I know them and like how they function. And so, right, we've had that routine where on the weekends they get to stay up like, oh, like till 10 or something, right? But they can fall back in line. And so sometimes, right, you got to like figure out what works for you. Some people will be like, I'm not even home until like 8, right? So maybe 8:30 won't be your bedtime. But play with it, and you know, and make it so that you can also like enjoy time with them, even like I said, right, quality time, it's good. So I have to like, we have a ritual where I give my kids like love, including my 12-year-old. And so he's got like these sea animals or whatever, so they'll come into our bedroom, right? And it's like, give my lovey love. And so like I'll kiss their lovey, and then my husband has to do the same, right? And it's every night it happens, right? And even if we're like traveling and we check in with them before bedtime, and like they hold up their loveys, and we have to like pretend that we're like kissing them. But again, my daughter's 9. I can't remember when we started it, but it's been since she was probably like 2. Right. And like I said, even my 12-year-old still likes that stuff. Reward systems, right, like can be used to either like implement a behavior, right, and teach a behavior, or like to motivate a behavior. Right. And so there's a million different things that you can do, right? Different ways. Some people, like for older kids, like a number, like a point system, right? The idea is, unless it's like a really big thing, right? So say the first time your kids go to bed on time when you ask them to, right? It's you do a big whoopla, and then you can give them like a surprise, like bubbles or Play-Doh or just something, right? It's like, oh, in the morning, the first time when we wake up, right, you guys get to pick something from like a goodie bag that you might have. If not, right, sometimes like $1 or something, and they like super motivated, but you want to kind of like make those things work. And so, right, it's like use it to motivate their behavior. Like there's nothing wrong. And it's not bribing. Bribing is when you give the reward before they complete the behavior. Yes. So in order for it to be a reward, they have to complete the behavior first, and then you can reward them, right? So no giving a cookie before they actually fall asleep. They have to fall asleep, and then they get the cookie in the morning. Yes. Okay. And just, you know, again, choose one routine to focus on, make sure that it's doable, that the skills are there for your child to be able to do, that you have the time, right? Don't take on too much, because, you know, like a stressed out parent is not a parent that can be like fully present, and enjoy, right, working on these things and like seeing the progress, right? And stay positive and really celebrate those things. I know that like when I could make it through, you know, like a morning, and we would leave and we'd be smiling, I'd be like, it's gonna be a phenomenal day, you know, and the kids would be like, you know, and we will come out of the house like, you know, just chanting or like singing some, and it's fun, you know, because I'm also celebrating me, like I did it, right, I kept it together, and you know, despite like the setback, but being very honest about that. And sometimes they're like, Mom, why are you so happy? I'm like, you guys didn't notice, like I had you guys ready to go, right, like 10 minutes before we're supposed to leave. And then they get all excited about that too, right? And they're like, oh yay, go mommy, you know. And so setting up an environment where like they also like are proud of you, right, it's a really big thing, right? Because it's like this dance that you guys do. And so hopefully that was helpful. And if you guys have any questions, right, like I can stay on for a little bit, but I know we want to be respectful of your time and let you get to your kids.
Thank you
as
guys.
well.
I actually have a challenge for you guys, or maybe like an encouragement. I encourage you guys to think about maybe those times of the day that are more challenging for you, where maybe like routine implementation would be beneficial. Maybe think about some of the things that we talked about today and think about, what you can incorporate. And then just kind of start small and see how that goes for you guys. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We have another webinar coming up next month, and this one will be around the stigma of asking for help and asking for support. The three of us are parents of neurodivergent children. Our children are all on the spectrum, but family support, I believe, is something that is needed all around. Sometimes my son, who is not on the spectrum, is more of a hot mess than my son who is autistic, and just having the support of my family and my friends and being able to call someone or being able to, ask for support or backup or help is like so helpful. And I think that especially in minority communities and communities of color, that is something that is very hard for a lot of us to do. And so this will be a little bit different type of structure. It's probably going to be more of a panel structure where we are going to talk about our personal experiences and, what stigma that we've encountered in our individual journeys around support is. And I am going to try my best to bring in a couple of individuals who Ride has been working with and kind of get their perspective on, what their struggles have been and how they've kind of overcome that and how they've addressed asking for help and asking for support. So I hope you guys can join us. Thank you guys so much for being here with us today. If you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Janice has all of our information. We will be providing you guys with a copy of the presentation. This has also been recorded, and you guys will be provided with a copy of the recording. We are trying to establish our presence on social media. I am not as young as I look, so this is a little bit hard for me. I'm doing it like a little turtle, but if you're interested in following us on Facebook or Instagram, please feel free to do so. Thank you guys so much again, and we definitely look forward to the next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Hi, guys.
Bye. Okay.